Okay, colleagues, thank you for being patient. We are starting this seminar, which is looking at what professional organizations in the health sector can do about challenging injustice and about challenging what is going on in Gaza at the moment. My name is Leslie London. I'm from the University of Cape Town in South Africa. I've been a member of various organizations where I've seen that the organizations either try to suppress or simply turn a blind eye to what is going on. And some of the members who've been part of that organization, Collegium Ramazzini, have helped organize this meeting. I'm going to hand over shortly to Judy Rebick, who's the moderator for this panel discussion, and she will explain how it's going to work. But I just want to acknowledge some of the colleagues you'll see in the panelist list who are not actually speaking but have helped to organize this. That is Jen Lee, Junaid Sidat, Donna Mergler, Iman Nouahid. And so I'm going to hand over to Judy, who is a journalist, a political activist, feminist, member of Independent Jewish Voices. She's the former president of the National Action Committee on the Status of Women in Canada. She's a co-founder of and former publisher of RightOnCanada.ca, author of 7 books, including a memoir, Heroes in My Head. She held the Sam Jinden Chair in Social Justice and Democracy and was appointed it when it was created. Over to you, Judy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Well, I'm delighted to be here and I welcome all of you. This is a really important topic, and we know that the repression of speech and attempted repression of speech and action in solidarity with Gaza is an international problem, and especially it's difficult in academic settings. And so those of us that are passionate defenders of the Palestinian people, or just, we believe in democracy, we think we have to have the right to speak. And so we've gathered academics and scientists who have experienced this to share their experiences with us and to discuss together what we can do to ensure that our voices are heard and that people are not punished for speaking out, and that the Palestinian people have the solidarity that they need from us, and to stop our governments from arming Israel and supporting Israel. So I am very delighted to begin our discussion. The way we're going to do it is each speaker will speak for 10 minutes, and then we'll have all the speakers, you'll see them each individually on screen, and then we'll bring all the speakers together to address any questions they have to each other, and then we'll open the questions to you. And the event lasts 2 hours, depending where you are. I'm not going to say when it's going to end, but 2 hours from now. And I'm really looking forward to this. So we begin with Amira Acker, who is an environmental epidemiologist at Boston University, who applies interdisciplinary research to identify risks associated with exposures to contaminants of emerging concern, and co-author of the article From Ecocide to Genocide, a Call to Action for Scientists Globally to Address the Destruction of Gaza. And so if all the other panelists could turn off their video, and Amira, please begin.
Thank you so much. Share my screen. Okay, so thank you so much for inviting me to speak about this extremely important topic on silence on the genocide and the environmental destruction currently taking place in Gaza. So I wanted to start us off with just giving a little bit of background on what's currently taking place. So while an estimated 55,000 Palestinians have been killed, this is the official report, the number is likely closer to approximately 200,000, according to studies that came out in The Lancet and some projections. This, of course, doesn't also include the most recent numbers. So it is estimated that 600 Palestinians were killed in the last 48 hours alone. And then, of course, we have the ongoing starvation campaign and what is considered the final solution for Palestinians, be it through the direct killing of Palestinians or the forced displacement of the latest plan of moving 1 million Palestinians to Libya. And even with this and this, horrific conditions that exist today, there's very little conversation around the long-term repercussions that is going to take place from the events of the last year and a half for many, many, many generations to come. And what has been incredibly depressing, I would say, is the complete silence in public health and medical institutions and establishments, which unfortunately, again, is consistent with our history. So even around the Holocaust, the medical establishments were silent, if not complicit, with the events of the Holocaust and other genocides around the world. And this is particularly concerning given the supposed evolution of our field, where we're now talking about things like social justice and environmental justice and human rights and structural racism and structural barriers and inequities and all of these words that we use in our daily vocabulary in the world of public health. And because of that, I really wanted to try to play a bigger role in trying to do something and trying to say something within my professional society, which is the International Society of Environmental Epidemiology, of which I've been a pretty active member for many years. So we had originally advocated to put a statement out specific to the environmental health concerns related to the current genocide. And we structured this in a number of ways, but we wanted to talk about the water, wastewater, and waste destruction, the destruction of these systems, in Gaza. We also wanted to talk about the chemical contamination, and that being directly from the bombs themselves, as well as the resulting particulate matter, asbestos, and metal contamination from the destruction of the infrastructure. We wanted to talk about the dire noise pollution that exists, particularly when it came to drones, the food insecurity, like I talked about. There's a massive starvation campaign that has been going on and off for the last few months, and then focus on the vulnerable populations, such as children, pregnant peoples, those with disabilities, and the elderly, and then tie in how access or the lack of access to healthcare and the destruction of the hospitals ties in to making all of these environmental health conditions worse. And then we also wanted to talk about that land loss trauma, which I'll very briefly explain. And I don't want to go into too much detail on this, but I just wanted to point out some of the environmental health conditions around the events taking place in Gaza right now. So, and I also want to point out that these numbers are currently outdated. So these are numbers, many of these numbers were taken from a United Nations environmental program report that came out last June. So last June, approximately 88% of wells and desalination plants were completely destroyed. 70% of Palestinians reported drinking salinized or contaminated water. 70% of sewage pumps and wastewater treatment plants were destroyed. Palestinians in the north of Gaza were forced to survive on only 12% of the recommended caloric intake, even less probably today. Almost 70% of all agricultural lands had been completely destroyed. And of course, as we all know, every single hospital and every single university has either been bombed or completely destroyed. And I really like this visual that came out a few months ago. And again, this is based on data from August of last year. So this picture depicts the amount of debris that exists in Gaza, which is more than any other so-called conflict in modern history. So it will take approximately 15 years to clear the debris from Gaza. And this is assuming that the Israeli military blockade is lifted and that 105 trucks with a 19-ton capacity operate for 8 hours every single day. And we also really wanted to take into consideration the decolonial perspectives. So rather than only talking about these kind of Western ideas of just contamination or just chemicals or water, we wanted to talk about the connection to land, the indigenous connections to land and the loss of that, and the kind of activities taking place that want to break that bond, similar to what was done in other colonial projects such as the United States, Canada, and Australia. And this is a fantastic paper that talks about, that identified a lot of the qualitative themes of how Palestinians feel about olive trees. So I highly recommend you all check out this paper. So when we first wanted to put the statement out, we received quite a bit of pushback. One of the initial comments that we got was that a previous group or a group had previously advocated for a statement right after October 7th, that they wanted ISCE to put a statement out then. So because they said no to that statement, they couldn't put anything out about the conditions in Gaza. We also got the excuse that things were too political, even though we constantly talk about the fact that public health is politics, that medicine is politics, but this was considered too political. We were also told that this will lead to a break in the unity within our organization of ISCE. But of course, the way that a lot of us understood that is that it would break the unity among those who are against the destruction of an entire people versus those who justify the destruction of that people. And then we also got accusations that this was not related to environmental health, even though we very clearly tried to only talk about the things that were specific to destruction of the environment. And I wanted to just very quickly give you an overview of what happened. So we did originally have a statement out for Ukraine, a very political statement, may I add, about what was taking place in Ukraine. And we pointed to that statement on Ukraine within our organization as sort of, that there's a precedent set. That we have referred to other political ongoing conflicts. So why can't we talk about this? But instead of hearing us out on Palestine, they ended up deciding to pull down the statement on Ukraine. We also tried to put together a symposium that was related to conflicts and health in general, but this was refused for being too political. There was a town hall organized at our last conference, of which I was a speaker. I didn't organize the town hall, but it was very, very well received. And the town hall was meant to just talk about the way our organization should deal with these kind of situations. When certain members want to put a statement out, what are the procedures in place, and how can we play a bigger role as a society when it comes to these kind of events on a more global scale. And during that town hall, there was a survey set out to those who attended, and the large majority of the attendees had wanted to put a statement out specific to what was taking place in Gaza. But at this point, there was still no movement, and I had personally given up on the organization. So we ended up doing our own independent review on the environmental destruction in Gaza. This was recently accepted for publication. But then even within this review, it had to go through a massive amount of review, and a lot of the language that is used by the United Nations, we were not allowed to use. As a very quick example, I couldn't, the only term we were allowed to use was war. And of course, there is no war when we talk about the situation in Gaza. This is much, well, anyway, we can go into that later, but we can also talk about not just at the institution level, but even when it comes to publication and the way that journals react to these kind of papers. And we also wanted to put a statement out against the violence that was taking place against our students, but this was also refused. There was a membership survey that was set out to all ISCE members, and overwhelmingly, people had accepted that the ISCE should play a role in putting statements out. And because of that, based on that, we are now trying to push for something, but these things are still ongoing, and we're not sure what's going to come out of that. And something I really, really wanted to stress is that here we are talking about institutions and not individuals. There were multiple members within ISCE, particularly like even within the leadership committee, the executive committee, that were very much in favor of doing something. But it's really a matter of, so I didn't want to point, I don't want to point to any names or anything. This was about the institution level and trying to get them to move and do something. And with that, I just wanted to say thank you, and I'd be very happy to hear your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Amira. Amira has to leave, so I wonder if anybody has any questions for any of the panelists or anyone in the Q&A. I'll just give you a minute if you have any questions. The other panelists will have the questions all at the end, but Amira unfortunately has to leave. Any questions? She said, someone's saying, can you tell us a bit more about the town hall that you had?
Sure. So the town hall was organized by a colleague of mine, and it was sort of set like a panel where there were multiple, very similar to what we're doing today, except in person. And everyone sort of had a chance to just speak about their views on what the society should be doing moving forward. So I spoke specifically about this same topic, about putting a statement out about what's happening in Gaza. There was someone else that talked about the policy committee in general and trying to make it less Western based and trying to open it up some more. We had someone else talk about air pollution, putting an air pollution statement out for the Far East and that sort of thing. So we had sort of different perspectives around the role of the society.
And also, could you describe what ISEE is in general terms, its ties, etc.?
Sure. So it's the International Society of Environmental Epidemiology. I believe it's the largest society for environmental health scientists, and it does have a pretty wide range of people who, scientists in environmental health. So everything from the exposure sciences all the way down to the pure epidemiologists. And we have, I actually don't know how many thousands of members. I know we have thousands of members from across the world. Although it does tend to be a little bit more heavily influenced by Western voices, be it in the US or across Europe.
And is there a board? Like, who makes the decisions?
Yeah. So in terms of these statements, it's largely the executive council that makes these sort of decisions. The members of the executive council are usually voted in. And so anything that you would like to put together, and this is sort of like a little bit unclear. And this is one of the things that was kind of exposed throughout this whole thing, that it is a little bit unclear as to how one can get these statements out. We had tried to do it through one committee, and then there was an active to try to go through straight to the executive council. But it does sort of depend on the topic. So anything related to, it's a little bit simpler, like air pollution, they can go straight through the policy committee. But it does get a little bit complicated.
Okay, people are asking more general questions, but I think I'll save those till the end of the discussion because I'm sure other people will think. So thank you very much,
Sure.
Thank
you. And I did see a question asking if I'm Palestinian. I am Palestinian, so I do have that very, strong tie to all of this, which I think is important to mention. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, our next speaker is Kathleen Ruff. And there she is. Hi, Kathleen. Kathleen was founding publisher of the Canadian Human Rights Reporter. Her research exposed the harmful international role that Canada played as a propagandist for the asbestos industry. She received the Canadian Public Health Association's Award of National Public Health Hero and Appreciation Award from the Asian Citizen Center for Environmental Health, and was awarded the Medal of Quebec National Assembly. She is a founder of the human rights advocacy website, RightOnCanada.ca. Welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you, Judy, and welcome to everybody. These are terrible times, that such horrific things are happening. And what is also so shocking is the silence from so many of the health organizations who are not speaking up. So I am speaking about the Collegium Ramazzini, which is an international scientific society founded in 1982. Its mission is to advance knowledge of occupational and environmental health, to prevent disease, and to save lives. It is named after Bernardino Ramazzini, who was a professor of medicine and in the late 1600s did pioneering, outstanding research and action to protect the lives of workers. He had this courageous, unusual idea at that time that the lives of workers were worth saving. And that is a lesson for all of us to understand that the lives of the people who are the most oppressed, we have a duty to make sure that they live. The mission of the Collegium is to be a bridge between the world of scientific discovery and the social and political centers which must act on the discoveries of science to protect public health. In other words, it is intended, its purpose is to make a difference in the real world, not just do theoretical science, which is wonderful, but to make sure that science changes the world for the good. The Collegium states that it is comprised of up to 180 fellows who are elected from about 40 different countries, who are, quote, internationally distinguished, intellectually independent physicians, scientists, and advocates who have devoted their professional lives to the improvement of occupational and environmental health. And, this is important, who have embraced the habit of truth. The Collegium has reached out to persons of integrity in every continent who have clear merits related to both scientific research and societal commitment in terms of translating science into policy, to making a real difference in the world. The Collegium states that societal commitment may also consist of other human rights related issues, in which it says the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is the best possible reference document for qualifying a nominee to be a member as societal commitment. In 2013, the Collegium Ramazzini instituted a special award to recognize colleagues outside the organization who have made a significant contribution as advocates for occupational and environmental health, safety, and justice. Again, an important commitment to justice. I was presented with that special award in 2013 for my human rights work to stop Canada sabotaging a UN Environmental Justice Convention and to stop exporting asbestos to countries in the global south, falsely telling them that they could safely use asbestos. So Canada was saying and acting with the message that the lives of folk, populations, workers in the global south did not matter. Their lives do not matter, because we certainly knew and didn't use it in Canada. When I was given the special award by the Collegium Ramazzini, I made the following statement, which I think is totally applicable to what's happening now. I said that human rights and science form a powerful and authentic combination. The foundation of both is the same: respect for the evidence. Respect for the evidence has always been unwelcome and an inconvenient standard. Vested interests have always sought to undermine science and human rights to their own advantage. Respect for evidence is profoundly egalitarian, democratic, and a moral standard. It means that regardless of political, economic, or social power, the same standard applies, that of respecting evidence. You can't have a double standard. You have to have courage. You have to have true commitment. You have to have integrity. If you're not going to stand up and have courage and integrity, you are going to be of no use, because you will meet opposition, you will meet vilification. You have to have courage to fight for the truth. In 2016, I was elected as an honorary fellow of the Collegium Ramazzini. I am not a scientist. I have no scientific credentials. I've done enormous work on trying to stop the asbestos propaganda that Canada was doing. And asbestos is an issue that the Collegium has been deeply involved with for a long, long time. On February the 23rd, 2023, the Collegium issued a strong, detailed statement condemning Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, saying that the Russian invasion is a violation of Article 2 of the UN Charter. The Collegium stated in its official public Collegium Ramazzini statement, we condemn Russia's acts of terror against civilians. We condemn its killing and injuring civilians with indiscriminate weapons and targeted attacks. We condemn the destruction of schools and healthcare facilities. We condemn the deliberate targeting of civilian energy and water infrastructure, the destruction of schools and healthcare facilities. We condemn the targeting of the use of food and energy as weapons of war. We condemn attempts to destroy Ukraine's cultural heritage. We condemn Russia for its devastating damage to Ukraine's environment, including water, soil, and ecosystem destruction. We condemn Russia for worsening economic instability in Ukraine. The Canadian Executive Committee did not, however, condemn the same crimes carried out against Palestinians by Israel. Instead, on November 26, 2023, the Collegium Executive Council issued 2 empty sentences saying it joined with all people of goodwill to decry the violence, suffering, and loss of life in Israel and Gaza, and that recognizing war as a public health crisis, we urgently warn of the mounting human suffering resulting from escalating violence and commit ourselves individually and collectively to provide for the immediate needs of these suffering populations and to promote just alternatives for enduring peace. A double standard, no accountability, no responsibility for anyone, no call for an end to the genocide that was being wreaked on the Palestinians. On February 23, 2024, 36 Collegium Ramazzini Fellows, including myself, wrote to the Collegium Executive Council asking them to consider the possibility of issuing a CR draft statement like the one they issued on Ukraine. They rejected our request, saying they did not agree that an updated statement was warranted and believed the 2 sentences they issued on November 26, 2023, adequately address the issue. It's horrific. What a double standard. They're saying that the lives of Palestinians do not matter, that the thousands and thousands of children being killed and starved to death do not matter. They called for no action and held no one accountable. On January 31st this year, 2025, we wrote again to the Collegium calling on them to join with the World Health Organization, UNICEF, the United Nations, independent UN experts, respected medical organizations such as Doctors Without Borders, and Israeli medical organizations such as Physicians for Human Rights Israel. And we asked it to condemn Israel's violation of international humanitarian law by its targeted destruction of healthcare facilities and arbitrary detention and killing of health workers in Gaza. And secondly, demand the release of Dr. Hassam Abu Safia and all detained health workers. They did not respond. On February the 1st, 2025, we wrote again to the CR saying, we urgently call on you to condemn the Israeli government for violating international humanitarian law and demand.
Could you wind up, please? Could you wind up?
The Collegium has refused to do any of those things. We considered all resigning, but we decided we should stay and fight for justice and fight for the Collegium to uphold the values it says it is committed to. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kathleen. Great. Okay, our next speaker is Amy Hagopian. Amy is a professor emeritus at UW's School of Public Health. She led a team to estimate mortality associated with the 2003 invasion of Iraq and has conducted other research on the status of war on health. She is chair of the American Public Health Association's International Health Section and active in the Peace Caucus, and is the 2018 recipient of the APHA's Dick Seidel and Barry Levy Peace Award. Amy, look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you for including me in this conversation today about how we can more effectively persuade our professional and academic organizations to take a stand on Palestine health justice. Nice flyer for this event. And just to be clear about my positionality, I'll tell you I'm a longtime academic. My career has been based mostly at the University of Washington in Seattle. And although I'm not Palestinian, my family's experience includes political violence and eradication through the Armenian genocide. I've been to Palestine only once in June of 2023. Our team with Harvard's Palestine Program for Health and Human Rights offered a class for students from the US, the West Bank, and Gaza at Birzeit University that summer. We did field trips to Jerusalem, Jaffa, Bethlehem, and in this photo, Hebron. I think it's important to think about the dominant narrative here. The master narrative normalizes choices, attitudes, stories, and behaviors that favor the powerful. I think it's important to recognize that the master narrative on Palestine in the United States, Israel, and Europe is at play in all of our organizational experiences. Israel has positioned itself as the victim, erasing the conversation about the context for the October 7 attacks, claiming it is compliant with international law, and pointing to any opposition to its disproportionate attacks on Palestinians as anti-Semitic. Our panel today is to talk about how our academic and professional organizations could show up for Palestine and how many of them have failed to do so. Our underlying premise is that these organizational statements matter in the discourse of Palestine's fate. I believe they do, and there is a history of such organizations making political and social change in the world, hence our being hosted today in Cape Town. My own association, the APHA, represents 25,000 people in 40 countries and has adopted a lot of policy statements on a wide range of topics, from the trivial to the vital. Many organizations have passed strong statements supporting the health and human rights of Palestinians, including several religious organizations and more than a few academic societies. So tip of the hat to those people. But some organizations have passed statements that are so weak as to be pitiful. Others have failed to pass any statement at all. At APHA, our first attempt was more than 15 years ago, and we lost on a tabling motion. 3 attempts since then to pass Palestine motions have also failed, twice because they weren't even allowed on the floor for a vote, and once with a 75% no vote. We even once failed an attempt to pass a general international statement opposing violent attacks on health workers, but lost because we named Israel among 22 offending countries. The statement we lost by 75% in 2013 wasn't even very radical. We pointed out the Israeli occupation was largely responsible for the suboptimal health status of Palestinians, but none of our proposed APHA statements have ever called for boycott, divestment, or sanctions on Israel as an occupying force. We had one small success, sort of surprisingly, in November of 2023. We submitted a late breaker proposal, a 10-page, well-documented policy statement, as APHA requires. We had to write it within a week of the October 7 attacks. It bogged down an oral debate on the floor and was about to get killed on a tabling motion. The moderator geniusly called for a bathroom break, during which principals engaged in rapid sidebar conversations, and we succeeded in agreeing on a one-sentence ceasefire motion. When we reconvened, the Governing Council passed it by 90%. However, APHA late breakers last only 1 year and have to be replaced by the usual 10-page tome at the next meeting. In 2024, the Executive Board disallowed our statement from even getting to the floor, even though our ceasefire resolution one sentence passed by 90% the previous year. For our 2025 conference coming up in the fall, no resolutions at all are being allowed except for 2 statements hand curated by the executive board. Whoops. Our international health section has an active and engaged Palestine health justice working group. The presence of so many young people on the governing floor in 2023 was meaningful and helped us to pass that one-sentence ceasefire resolution. Going forward, however, banners were banned from the Governing Council and other measures were put in place to stifle visible support for Palestine. But we are a creative bunch. So after our motion to override the suspension of a Palestine policy statement from the Governing Council floor in October 2024 failed, we donned red gloves and walked out of the hall, marching and chanting through the exhibit hall. We've analyzed our experience at APHA and compared it to other organizations that have been both successful and unsuccessful. And we've concluded there are 4 predictors of organizational success and failure on Palestine resolutions. First, statements need to emerge from compelling current events. Second, the organization needs to have some muscle memory associated with passing progressive statements on other topics. Third, the debate has to be open and compelling speakers need to present a good case. And finally, the organization's decision-making processes need to be democratic and not subject to bullying by powerful factions. Because rhetoric matters, we've assembled a team at our university more than 10 years ago now to examine why talking about Palestine is so hard. We concluded there are some standard tropes that pro-Israeli forces use to shut down debate and rational conversation about Palestine. To some extent, these shutdown strategies can work in any conversation on a controversial topic, but defense of Israel takes all these rhetorical devices to a new level. I encourage you to go to this website and read our paper on in the South Atlantic Quarterly to check out our work on this analysis. This will be in the slides that will come to you after the webinar. At our APHA conference in 2018, I won the prestigious Seidel Levy Peace Award. This was ironic because at the Governing Council meeting earlier in the day, our proposed resolution opposing violent attacks on health workers and health facilities was defeated because we named the countries where those attacks were occurring: Central African Republic, Yemen, Nigeria, Syria, Afghanistan, South Sudan, Iraq, Congo, and of course, Israel. We're not supposed to notice when Israel commits war crimes, so Governing Council councilors chickened out of their public health duty and voted it down. I was so disappointed, but not at all surprised. You would think it wouldn't be controversial to oppose violent attacks on health workers. Sometimes we can get APHA to sign on to letters because Governing Council finally adopted the policy on attacks on health workers in 2019 after we agreed to drop the names of the countries where attacks were perpetrated. Our executive director agreed to write this 2020 letter in support of the WHO Board of Inquiry to examine assaults on health facility attacks in Syria. And when our team reached out to colleagues in APHA's pro-Israel camp asking if they'd support a ceasefire for polio in August of 2024, we were pleased to get their support for a combined note to our executive director asking him to sign a letter in support of a ceasefire for polio. Our executive director did write the letter we requested, and our lobbyist mentioned it in his September legislative update. While Israel allowed short pauses in its assault on Gaza for a first round of polio immunizations, the second round doses, however, were halted when Israeli occupation forces shut down their operations. APHA's call for a polio ceasefire was covered in Salon, which was great, especially since we were the only health professional organization at the time to take this stand. Of course, it is odd to be vaccinating children for an infectious disease while bombs are then dropped on the same kids that we just vaccinated. We were thrilled when APHA expressed support for reinstating United Nations Palestine refugee support funding. However, there was no follow-up or anything to indicate we really meant it. Effective lobbying requires persistence and bringing member voices to Congress. So just a recap. We made some progress in APHA with our policy statements over the years, but we've also met with a lot of frustration. We've been trying since Israel's 2007 assault on Gaza to pass a statement in support of Palestine health justice. 3 more efforts to pass resolutions at the 2009, 2012, and 2013 annual meetings also failed. Our late breaker statement in 2023 was scrapped in the face of fierce opposition testimony, but we did pass by 90% a 1-sentence statement to support a ceasefire. In 2024, our update to that late breaker was banned from even receiving consideration by the Governing Council. And this year, no new policy statements were allowed at all unless they were commissioned by the Executive Board. Why? APHA's policy gatekeeping body, the Joint Policy Committee, says our statements are one-sided, that the events on the ground change too quickly to adopt a statement, that the action steps aren't likely to succeed, that APHA's generic anti-war resolution covers us just fine. Oh, and there's no evidence that what we're calling for has public health impact. And finally, our pro-Israeli opponents in the association keep honing their rhetoric as we do ours. They just published this paper explaining that Israel isn't really engaged in settler colonialism. That might be an amusing read for some of you. So our new policy proposal, policy process going forward in APHA is going to become more complicated, more difficult, and will unlikely to lead to better outcomes. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Amy. Okay, our next speaker is Nick Maynard. He's a leading upper GI surgeon based in Oxford with 25 years of experience in the field. He has worked extensively in Gaza and since 2010 teaching medical students and carrying out upper GI surgery. In December 2023, he led the first UK emergency medical team into Gaza during the current conflict and returned in April and May 2024, providing humanitarian medical care. He will be returning to Gaza next month to work at Nasser Hospital. He has been a vocal advocate for Gaza, including media interviews, lectures, and multiple meetings at the United Nations and with politicians in Westminster and Washington. He has recently been awarded the Humanitarian Medal by King Charles for his humanitarian work in Gaza. Please welcome Nick Maynard. Nick, can you get your video on?
It's not letting me. It says
okay, okay, well, can we just listen to you then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much indeed for that introduction. It's now day 595 since October the 7th, 595 days of consecutive days of killing, war crimes, genocide, and it's day 78 since there has been no aid allowed into Gaza at all. I've been going out since 2010. I've had 2 trips out there since October the 7th, working in Al-Aqsa Hospital, and I'm about to go in next month. And even though I know Gaza well, I've been going there for 15 years, even though I'd been in contact almost daily with friends and colleagues soon after October the 7th, I wasn't remotely prepared for what I saw there. And I can safely say I've seen things in Gaza which I never would have expected to have seen in any healthcare setting. I've witnessed many atrocities, many examples of clear war crimes. We heard earlier from one of the speakers about the death rate of 55,000 people killed by direct trauma. We know that's a gross underestimate. There are many thousands who are still buried under the rubble. We know there are more than 18,000 children who've been killed. On March the 18th alone, the day that the ceasefire was broken by the Israeli army, 183 children were killed. And I've seen multiple children with traumatic amputations of 1, 2, sometimes 3 limbs, severe head injuries with brain exposed, severe fatal burns. All the medics that I've been out there with, we have all witnessed gunshot wounds to the heads, to the chests, to the abdomens of pre-teen children. And there's been on average 35 children killed per day in Gaza in the last 18 months. 35 children per day, reaching a maximum of nearly 200 in March. In Ukraine, the other war going on in the world, the equivalent number is 0.7 children per day. In Iraq, it was 0.6. In Syria, it was 3. In Gaza, more than 35. And there have been more children killed in Gaza in the last 5 years than in all the conflicts in the world over the last 5 years. All hospitals have been attacked. There are no functioning hospitals in the north of Gaza now after the attacks on the Indonesian hospital and others. We've heard a lot about the Shifa hospital attacks. In recent days, Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, the European Gaza Hospital, they've both been attacked on multiple occasions. The European Gaza Hospital is now no longer able to carry out any surgery at all. It was the only hospital carrying out cancer treatment, and now it can do that no longer. We know that more than 1,400 healthcare workers have been killed since October the 7th. We know that more than 400 have been abducted, detained illegally, many of them tortured, and many of them have been killed. And that's been detailed in great detail in a publication by Health Workers Watch, which is available on the internet. And they include the stories of the young plastic surgeon, Ahmed Makadma, who I worked with in Shifa Hospital in May 2023, and his mother, Yusa, who was a physician at Al-Shifa Hospital. They were both executed. They were both discovered with bullets in their head, handcuffed, with their hands handcuffed behind their back. We know the story of Adnan al-Bursh, the iconic orthopedic surgeon from Gaza. He was abducted, he was detained, he was tortured, and he was killed. And a very detailed investigation by a Sky investigative journalist interviewing fellow detainees describes how his mode of torture for his final 10 days of his life was being serially raped every single day until he died. We heard about Hussam Abu Safir, the director of Kamal Adwan Hospital, who remains in an Israeli detention. My close friend Mohammed al-Sharif, who was abducted, detained. He was released last week, and I've been talking to him, hearing about his daily torture by the Israelis. We know about the starvation being used as a weapon of war. We know about the malnutrition. Patients of mine, such as Lama, who was 18, and Tala, who was 16, young women who were malnourished and died despite surgery to treat their war wounds because they were malnourished. They died under my care. And what about the excess deaths? What about the 220,000 that the Lancet estimates have died from excess deaths due to non-trauma deaths, due to cancer, due to heart disease, due to malnutrition, due to infectious diseases? Gaza, as we've heard, has been failed by the rest of the world, by our media, by our governments, and the double standards and the hypocrisy when we compare how they've reacted to Ukraine are breathtaking. And they've been failed by academic institutions, but in particular, something that makes me so angry, they've been failed by our medical institutions. And I and my colleagues have been repeatedly obstructed by our medical institutions. The British Medical Association, the General Medical Council, they've all been cowardly, they've all been silent, they've all refused to stand out and condemn the obvious war crimes and atrocities. Our royal colleges, the Royal College of Surgeons of England, when Ahmed Makadma, the young plastic surgeon, was executed with a bullet in his head, he had a humanitarian fellowship from our College of Surgeons. When he was executed, the college said it was very sad to hear about the death of Ahmed Makadma. Not the murder, not the killing, the death. Our hospital trust, my own trust, Oxford University Hospitals, has refused to allow our medical students to hold vigils on the grounds of the hospital. They've refused to allow us to give talks about the humanitarian catastrophe taking place in Gaza. We have many examples of individuals who've been targeted because of their support for Gaza. Some have been suspended. Many of them have undergone severe stress because they've been targeted for speaking out, not about political issues, but about humanitarian catastrophes. We've all experienced difficulties in being given a platform to speak out about what's happening in Gaza. And it's worth remembering that core to good medical practice, according to the General Medical Council, is making the care of patients the first concern, providing a good standard of practice and care, acting with honesty and integrity and being open if things go wrong, and most of all, protecting the health of all patients, whether they're your patients or other patients. And it seems unconscionable to me that doctors and healthcare institutions throughout my country can remain silent and refuse to acknowledge what is going on. And one of the most upsetting findings of Health Workers Watch, that document I mentioned earlier, and this has all been heavily evidenced, it's all been submitted to the international courts, the multiple examples of the medical neglect, the medical negligence, and the connivance of Israeli healthcare workers in the torture and the abuse of Palestinian prisoners under their care. And that evidence has been drawn to the attention of the General Medical Council in my country and drawn to the attention of the British Medical Association, and they have remained silent. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Nick. And talk about courage, actually going there and providing service. Thank you very much for that. Okay, our next speaker is Fred Hosea. He's a critical systems thinker and a conceptual architect for complex healthcare systems. He is experienced in operations, research and innovation in clinical technologies in a nonprofit healthcare system that now cares for 12 million members. As a World Health Innovation Fellow in 2023, his team developed an AI prototype to guide healthcare innovators through 36 critical success factors to ensure operational readiness and inclusion of system lifecycle stakeholders. He currently serves on the board of the Universal Clinical Engineering Federation to deploy clinical engineers to disaster situations. Please welcome Fred.
We're joined together today in an anguishing quandary of how to confront institutional and indeed civilizational crisis. As presenters, we're all struggling with how to confront a crisis of this magnitude in 10-minute segments. And I envy my colleagues' timely discipline. In the interest of time, I've had to move some important slides and commentary into the appendix of this presentation, but I will re-record the whole thing afterwards at a more leisurely pace and make it available through the meeting hosts. I will also be talking much faster than usual, so please forgive the frantic pace. I'm very humbled to be here with such distinguished speakers and audience members, and I freely admit my own deep qualms about the relevance of the very models I'm going to present. I ask for your indulgence, hope you will think about some of these models and that will, I hope, help us confront the failed institutions that we work in to elevate all health professions globally into a more muscular ethical framework that denounces and defeats genocide. We've been working under the oppressive constraints of professional caution, government bureaucracy, fear-mongering military, predatory economics, and adversarial religions. We need to go beyond that. The daily horror we face now is that most Western governments are behaving in many ways that are indistinguishable from the death architects of the Third Reich. I think we'll be facing more and more of such problems in the future that will disrupt normal healthcare operations. These disruptions are forecasted in polycrisis and existential research at Cambridge, Oxford, Cascade Institute, Stanford, and others. Although my background gives me some grounding to understand these challenges, it's clear that our individual efforts will not be sufficient to reverse the degenerative trends that have been set in motion over decades by nations and economic interests that were forged over centuries in the heat of wars and competitive self-interest. What are we to do when our own governments and professions are so blatantly materially complicit in sustained genocidal violence? Why are health professions themselves so terribly silent in the face of destroyed hospitals, kidnapped, tortured, and assassinated clinicians, and maimed children who have to suffer amputations without anesthesia? Perplexity AI gave me a very credible set of explanations why so many professionals fail to take robust ethical positions on genocide. Some of these reasons include fear, funding, loss, appearance, disunity, legal repercussions, organizational culture, and stakeholder pressure. Addressing each of these rationales or evasions is a whole program in itself, but we have to move on. The relentless and incomprehensible carnage wrought against the Palestinian people for decades is forcing us to think far beyond our normal professional lives. And the grotesque landscapes of violence, hatred, and terror that have saturated our lives for months, years, and decades are deeply disturbing. My main contention is that we appear to be at a turning point of civilizational disintegration, both symbolized and materialized by the multinational state terror being waged against Palestinians in various forms over decades. We need to find right paths of action. I believe we need to think and imagine in large-scale civilizational terms that are typically not part of our normal personal or professional lives. We need to take professional agency to a whole new level of audacious institutional aspiration that we must forge together as global health professionals. Some of my work with Kaiser Permanente, WHO, other universities, and professional associations is useful to frame these challenges, but it's not remotely sufficient. New ideas and new alliances are essential to any approximation of a solution to literal genocide that is being sponsored, massively funded, and legitimated by Western governments. Much of my work had to do with long-term, high-complexity thinking in both normal and disaster conditions of healthcare. These complexity challenges are even greater during disaster conditions when normal assumptions don't apply. This has been horribly true for the months, years, and decades of assaults on Palestinians that have been disastrously managed by national and international agencies. Some of the things I've done are I manage a program of bioclinical engineering working groups. It's a global network, and disaster and polycrisis preparedness and management is one of the groups. Each group meets once a month, and they will tackle, our polycrisis group will tackle many of the challenges that are being raised in today's presentation. My main contention is that the destruction of Gaza and the decades of prior assaults on Palestinian rights are symptoms of grave civilizational disintegration that may well foreshadow somehow some institutional mafias will address future pandemic and polycrisis events that will affect even more people. They will already be prepared to use lethal violence and savage indifference to human rights and international law. In this grim view, public health could disappear as a reliable framework of human well-being. This framework here presents many dimensions that a professional career path might take in public health or any of the subdivisions thereof, depending on who your employer is, what roles you're assigned to, and how actively you get involved with your professional associations, government agencies, and international organizations. The more we take on bigger challenges and responsibilities over the years at a societal, global, or civilizational scale, the more we will be contributing to the ideals of safety and healthcare for all. We can intervene at the micro level. Here we are in Quito protesting the genocide with banners and white kites, commemorating the life of professor and poet Rifat al-Reir, who was killed shortly after he wrote his final poem, If I Must Die. A global memorial of white kites could be a fitting tribute that awakens conscience and compassion for the oppressed. My personal efforts have been targeted at different levels and scales of what I see as a civilizational problem. In retrospect, these efforts seem like trying to stop an avalanche with a slingshot. I tried to work with India to provide mobile vans to fit and manufacture prosthetics for Palestinian child amputees, but that went nowhere because Israel has been blocking international humanitarian aid. I've also drafted several documents for possible publication to declare a global health emergency and to assert the need for new and stronger ethical foundations for global health professions facing polycrisis challenges, arguing that traditional institutions have manifestly failed in their most basic raison d'etre as responsible stewards of human safety and well-being. The global resources of the UN can be instantly paralyzed by a single vote in the Security Council. I circulated a resolution in Spanish to promote international indigenous denunciation of the Gaza genocide as a global outrage against indigenous peoples, but without results. I've used AI tools to identify organizations and strategies that can promote collaboration among health professions to oppose genocide. That alone could be an all-day program or conference topic. And I drafted a survey to document the positions of global professional healthcare associations regarding genocide. I've corresponded and talked with several leaders in my field of clinical engineering and was either ignored or told to take my questions elsewhere or told not to include them in future emails. If even they can't bring themselves to denounce flagrant genocide, these myopic professions demand a new ethical foundation. Health professions should not have to concede superior power, authority, budgets, and legitimacy to murderous political systems headed by sociopathic leaders. We might use these dialogical principles to focus research, education, and discussion on how to forge a more just and healthy future that works for everyone. This is a universalization of public health as a new kind of global institution of influence and authority. This framework alone could be an entire bachelor's and master's program of transformational knowledge formation, policy research, and institutional reform. This kind of principle-based dialogue is a necessary antidote to the false certainties and adversities and language policing of absolutist ideologies, demagogues, and zealots who thrive on the false heroism of black and white polarizations, demonization of the opponent, and simplistic solutions relying on oppression, apartheid, imprisonment, and war. Here's a daunting list of 100 polycrisis trends and events that can impact healthcare systems. In this grim context, professions need to graduate from being merely reactive cognitive monopolies for hire to being transformational civilizational leaders armed with an expanded sense of agency and confrontive ethics. What type of institutional innovations will we need to manage multiple overlapping disasters and humanitarian catastrophes if we can't even handle Gaza? What can Gaza teach us about such scenarios and the catastrophic flaws in our world institutions? How can we possibly overcome the crushing personal sense of impotence and futility that comes with facing these monumental questions on a daily basis as disjointed, scattered professions and isolated individuals? On the other hand, we see some of the disruptive forces of decivilization. We need to expand our value framework to assert ethical leadership on all fronts as a civilizational necessity to avert civilizational collapse. The current institutional acceptance of genocide by national and international agencies provides an even stronger permission for war and human misery as acceptable models of unaccountable national purpose, business-driven bellicosity, and normalized injustice. To counter these forces, we need to reject and outgrow the culturally, historically outdated models of morality and law that are based on fear, conformity, adversity, and force, and promote ethical motivations driven by aspiration, commitment, conscience, and consensus. Sorry, my slide is not changing.
Oh, you're going to another slide? Okay.
Okay, there we go. From a positive and assertive perspective, I propose that public health is a globally comprehensive ensemble of all health professions that should be elevated above the traditional organizational and national jurisdictions into a global authority comparable to that of WHO, with consequential powers comparable to a transnational state to actively denounce, oppose, and defeat genocidal actions. This could also include obligations, professional obligations to denounce, oppose, and defeat war crimes, and crimes against humanity as being fundamentally unacceptable assaults on public health. Health professionals should not be expected to be obediently repair the horrific damages caused by the insane leadership of dysfunctional nation-state institutions. The do no harm oath needs to be expanded to include an ethical obligation to denounce and oppose harm wherever it threatens human being. I would argue that the absence of such a unifying uplift from ethical aspirations will leave the world in the hands of regressive, moral, and legal opportunists, pulling us backwards into savagery and despair.
Thank you so much, Fred. I
Oh.
know I'm going to be coming back to look at these. We didn't expect a whole world altering presentation, so I really appreciate it. Okay. My mind is a little blown, as I'm sure everybody
We
did.
haven't even gotten to the hard part.
Oh, we haven't? Well, I'm afraid we're going to have,
Okay.
hopefully you can bring up some of it in the discussion. Okay.
Okay.
That was
Very good.
incredible.
Thank you.
I'm really impressed, but I don't think
Okay.
we have time to get into it at all, but amazing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to ask, I'm going to go to the question period now, and I'll ask everybody yeah, great, all the panelists back in. So first of all, I just, on behalf of all of the participants, want to thank you for your presentations, which were really good. And to tell you the truth, I don't work with scientists very often, so I thought you were going to be like boring, and and you weren't. You were really good. So, and I have to deal with my stereotypes. So thanks so much, and we have a lot of questions. So I will ask the questions as Leslie has organized them, and whoever wants to answer, just you can just put up your hand like this. It's okay. You don't have to find the hand button unless you want to. So the first one is, what are your thoughts about how to approach and enlist members of the silent majority in the organizations who favor speaking out, but maybe are kind of shy or scared to do it? Anybody want to address that?
I can
Amira?
add one small thing. So I really like what AJPH has done, which is form a coalition around Palestine and or health in Palestine. And that's something that I think we're missing in my society at ISC. And it's something there's a few of us that have been thinking about putting together, and we're wondering how to formulate it and how to best protect students and new researchers that decide to join it, because there does seem to be a bit of a bias in academic circles towards students. So, but that's, I think, probably one way where if you try to formalize it somehow, the way that AJPH do it, that you might have a stronger voice within the society.
Nick? Yeah.
I think people need to be challenged. I think it's unacceptable now to be silent. And the way that I have taken this forward, and indeed many of the colleagues I've been out to Gaza, is telling people the real bare truth of what's going on and giving personal examples, as I've done tonight. But I often do that with PowerPoint presentations and show them pictures of mutilated children. It sounds horrible, but actually, and I find that once people have heard the true atrocities of what's going on out there, because they're certainly not being told that by the media, it does give them impetus to get out and speak about it. And people need to be told what's going on, and then they need to be challenged to go and share that.
Okay. Anyone else want to speak about that? I guess it's not. Oh, Kathleen, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we need to do, and to my mind, it's the way to fight for human rights, is to get the issue out in the open and make people accountable. Like all the members of these organizations are supposed to be dedicated to protecting health, are staying silent. So many of them I just don't have the courage to speak up. And I think that we need to bring that out in the open, that being silent is violence. You're accountable, and we need to make them accountable and on the record and bring it out into the open.
Amira?
And just one more comment on this as well. there's a constant conversation around like, what is the statement going to do? Like if ISCE puts out a statement, it's not going to free Palestinians. It's not going to make any difference in the grand scheme of things. But the purpose of putting these kind of statements out is to normalize the conversations around Palestine. It's to give people permission to come out and speak. So the fact that I've had a number of students that have approached me, the fact that I wear my kufiya going into work every day. I've had students come up to me and thank me for wearing my kufiya because it allows them, it gives them courage to speak up. So I think it's a matter of like even ourselves, and I know like many of us here on the panel, like we're pretty vocal, but it's about, you know, continuing to talk about it. It creates a setting where others are more comfortable to be brave and to be courageous and to talk about this.
Okay, well, one of the reasons people aren't is because they're cute of this notion that criticizing Israel is anti-Semitic, and none of you have spoken of that. But you know, myself, I first went to Israel in 1970, and I've been against Zionism ever since. When I saw the racism there, even back then, which my Palestinian friends called the good old days, you know. So. And I've been, you know, I've been completely isolated from the Jewish community, but I was prepared for that. But a lot of people are worried about that. How do you deal with that? Because, you know, that's underneath, that's how they're trying to silence people, right? And a lot of Jewish people do fear anti-Semitism because of the propaganda that being against Israel is anti-Semitic. So therefore they feel like there's a rise in anti-Semitism. So I just wonder how you address that.
One quick thing is to note the fact that Palestinians are a Semitic people, so killing Palestinians is also anti-Semitic. And the Zionist policies in Israel constitute occupation against the Palestinians and an imitation of many of the tactics of oppression and homicide that occurred in the Holocaust. It's so complicated. There are aspects of a post-traumatic. It is Israel de facto a post-traumatic stress syndrome situation that has adopted the identity of its oppressors in Germany. That's a whole psychological thing that
Yeah, I wouldn't
we
get
could go
into
into.
that. Anybody else want to address that?
Well, maybe just to say, you know, on my campus, for example, there was a anti-Semitism task force that formed and put out a completely ridiculous report. It was chaired by, frankly, somebody in epidemiology who didn't have any understanding of the history or politics behind any of this. She's married to an Israeli, so she was chosen for this task, kind of unfairly to her, probably. But then our wonderful progressive Jewish faculty formed their own group and wrote a response to that task force report that was strong and powerful, and we circulated it effectively. And that was a very important antidote to that statement.
Good. That's a good example. Thank you. Okay. There's quite a few questions. Oh, Amira, you want to address that? Yeah.
Just very briefly to just sort of highlight what Amy said, I think the onus around this topic really falls on white voices and Jewish voices, because no one's listening to the Palestinians, particularly when it comes to conversations around anti-Semitism. And this was a conversation that in my past as a student activist, you know, we had tried to address, and we were largely unsuccessful for the most part. So it's really about, I think, white voices on this topic more so than yeah, I just really want to highlight that. You know, I think there's enough on Palestinian shoulders and just people of color in general.
Kathleen?
I think it's really important, and I think we all do this, is that we put forward the issue that we are wanting to support human rights for all, and that no one is safe unless there is human rights for all, and that we are supporting we want safety for everyone. We want safety for Israelis, we want safety for Jews, we want safety for Palestinians, and that the argument and the framing that supporting Netanyahu and who has been ruled as a war criminal for starving children is not representing the views of so many courageous, wonderful Jewish organizations all around the world, and individual Jewish experts who are saying this is not our values, this is not what we believe in. The genocide, killing kids, is not a Jewish value, and that we are motivated by us who are advocating, we are motivating by trying to make everyone safe, and no one is safe until everyone is safe.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. That's great. Okay, quite a few people asked this question more or less, which is how much energy should we spend trying to change these organizations that have so far failed to take meaningful action in face of the live stream genocide? Maybe we should be starting new organizations or dropping out and focusing our activism on politics in the street. Who wants to take that one? Anybody?
Yeah, I can start because
Yeah,
that was
go
what
ahead.
I was leading to in my presentation.
Right. Okay, good.
The need for new institutions through alliances of people with shared ethical visions of health, and I think we spent more than 19 months now living with the traditional institutions, and I think that constitutes clear evidence of a civilizational deterioration. I think we need to form what I call a professional alliance for civilizational ethics, and public health would be redefined as a global health institution that would have much more consequential authority to stand up to politicians and militarists who couldn't even get a job as to change bedpans with their qualifications. And yet we find worldwide health professionals are deferring to these state institutions. And that, I think that has to change. Ultimately, that could evolve into what I call the World Parliament of Professions, that could be an intermediary between the weakened UN and the emerging BRICS alliances. So that's a whole big complicated thing.
Anyone else want to address it in a little less global way, in a local way?
Sorry, I feel like I'm speaking too much. I'll try to keep it brief. But
no.
We want, in this group, we want to hear from Palestinians.
Fair enough. But I think it's both. I think we definitely do need new groups, but I also want to point out that there have been new groups that have been coming out specifically to what's taking place. And it's a matter of trying to strengthen those new organizations, be Doctors Against Genocide and the like. And I think we also need to work within the institutions in order to drive people, like to sort of like you just open people's eyes and avoid being in our own kind of chambers. So where we need to reach out to people within our institutions, but then also start new ones, like Brad said.
Okay. Anybody else want to address this? Okay. So the next question is, when our organizations meet gathering large numbers of us together, such as APHA, to which I belong, shouldn't we be taking mass dramatic action, marching in hundreds or thousands, occupying local government institutions? We need to be as dramatic as genocide and recognize that the leadership of these organizations will never be supportive. So in other words, organizing protest against your own organization. That's how I understand that. Anybody want to speak on that? Amy?
So as a person who has done this sort of organizing within APHA, I'll just comment that, there are powerful forces that control these associations, and they limit the democratic processes to shut down debate that they find threatening to their authority and to their status among their peers. And we have to understand their interests and what is at play here. And I think one of the interests that we can appeal to that I think is important in APHA is that membership and membership numbers and dues paying members are important to them. That is an interest they care about. And young people are always the source of the next wave of new members, correct? And young people are good on this issue. They have been reliable and progressive and brave, especially given that they're new in their careers and subject to discrimination should they speak out too much. And yet they showed up in that governing hall carrying that banner and were willing to speak up. And that is what persuaded our executive director that we had to have at least a one-sentence statement, because he saw those 100 students standing around the room and knew that they were not going to be happy if we just shut down the whole conversation. And so he specifically, our executive director, who's been in that role for way too long, 25 years, he specifically negotiated that statement in response to the young people's courage and visibility. And then they shut down their capacity to be more visible the following year. I mean, there's always a series of negotiating tactics and maneuvers that have to be navigated.
Yeah, one thing I do every day is repost things on LinkedIn. And it's that particularly ones that show increasingly large protests around the world. And I think, when we go back to the Vietnam War days, the public protests were, I think, a significant part of what eroded support for the war and eventually ended it. So I think the more we can republish in social media, which is a huge amplifier and a counterpart to the sort of stifling narratives that exist in traditional mainstream media.
Okay. Okay, we have another question now, which is Nick, unfortunately, doesn't seem to be on anymore. I don't know if he's gone or Nick, are you still around and just your camera's not working? No. Okay.
He had to step out. He's coming back in 5 minutes.
Okay, he's coming back in 5 minutes. Well, this is more directed toward him. So I guess I'll ask a question because Fred has given us a sort of global look. Why do we think it's happening around Gaza? I mean, Fred argued it's a civilization. What did you call it? Civilization. It's like the crisis of civilization. I agree with that. I agree with that. And I also agree, like Gaza is the first, the clearest image of it. Why? Like, why is it happening now? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's too broad a question, but it's what comes to me when I heard all of you talking and the importance of this moment for us all. Why? Why is it happening now? Amira?
I think it's because of the silence and the repression. There are other examples of atrocities and genocides worldwide. I mean, probably not as condensed as we see what's happening in Gaza, but I think it's because of the unique properties of anti-Palestinian racism. Anti-Palestinian racism differs slightly from things like, anti-Arab racism or Islamophobia in that it's about not allowing people to speak. And I think that's what sort of made things erupt a lot more, in that especially young people, they're seeing one thing, they talk about it, and then they're condemned for speaking out. And then the fact that it's so different than what they see in the media. And I think it's that repression is probably a part, like the intensity and the brutality of it all was probably a big factor of it all. But I think it was also the silencing that worked against the power, those, in power, that tried to limit the discussion, and it just, yeah, backfired.
Any other views on this? No. Okay. Can we have some examples of organizations that have taken a stand against Israel's war crimes in Gaza and the West Bank, and what lessons can be learned from them? I noticed earlier that a medical association had taken a stand. I just noticed that in the chat. So, you know,
WMA,
organizations that are related to the work you're doing that have taken a stand, and what happened with that and why it happened. Yeah, Amy.
Can I share the slide where I had this up? I went by it so quickly, nobody probably noticed it. But, let me see if this will work. So these are some of the organizations that have succeeded in passing statements. These religious organizations at the top, the Presbyterians, the Methodists, the Quakers, and the Pope. And academic associations, the Association for Asian American Studies, Sociological Association, AAUP has actually fairly newly come out on this. The previous regime that ran the American Association of University Professors was pretty conservative on this issue, and there was actually a statement condemning academic boycotts. And then there was an election for new officers last year, and we elected a very progressive new slate of officers at AAUP. So those of you who are in academic institutions in the United States, you should join your AAUP and support this new slate of people. The Middle East Studies Association has always been good on this, and the anthropology folks are good. And like I said, these predictors of success include having open democratic processes, having some experience passing progressive statements on other issues. Let's see, I have it here. People have honed good arguments. For example, in APHA, we try to connect this issue, especially for the people who are regular state and local healthcare workers in their communities who may not see the relationship between this topic and their daily work. It's important to make those connections for people. And choosing good moments in history, you know, right after a big Israeli attack. Unfortunately, those happen often enough that you can always find a right moment to come out on this. So thanks for letting me share that.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was very helpful. Okay, the role of science and tech institutions that are actively manufacturing the ammunitions and tools of surveillance, et cetera, baffle. What can be done without a serious abolitionist lens? I would appreciate thoughts on how to do this whilst in the same institution. Like if your institution, I give the example of writers who have in Canada who have challenged the Giller Prize, which is the biggest literary prize because they're sponsored by the Bank of Nova Scotia, which invests in arms, right? And actually have had some success in getting writers to refuse to getting ex-winners to protest and getting individual writers to refuse to submit to Giller. So the question is, what about in your organizations, the organizations you work with, the role of manufacturing arms? I also remember in the Vietnam War, that was a way that we organized on the university, was professors who were actually doing research that was helping the war, that kind of thing. Have there been that kind of activism that you've seen? No? Yeah, Kathleen.
I think that overall we've seen such a sliding away from human rights generally, like after the protests against the Vietnam War and against racism and poverty in the US, there was an effort a meeting made by right-wing politicians and organizations to say what can we do to stop this? And they concentrated on two things. There's been books written about this at their meeting, and they decided that one of the things they needed to do was destroy hope, so that people wouldn't think hope was possible. And the other thing was to make people much more dependent on money, get rid of public services, so that universities and governments were much more under the influence of neoliberalism. And so, for example, to my mind, we need way more courage to challenge things. Here where I live in BC, in this tiny community of Smithers, there's a government store, there's a government liquor store. We have a supposedly progressive government, and I think one of the problems is progressive political leaders and progressive organizations have become so much more cowardly. So in the NDP, the so-called supposedly progressive government of BC, immediately stopped the sale of Russian vodka in the government's liquor stores. Took that action. For Palestine, it continues to sell illegal liquor grown on, from Israeli terrorist invasions of the West Bank and so forth. And it says, this is what it says, our progressive political government of BC, it says that that's a personal matter of consumer choice. I mean, that's horrific, that double standard. And the Canadian government, the Liberal government and the Conservative government, both of them the same when they're in power, they say that using boycott and divestment is wrong, and they oppose it. It's evil. It's anti-Semitic. I mean, we need to challenge this. We're going so far backwards on human rights, and we desperately, to my mind, need more activism, more courage. I would like to see people, challenging, sitting down, protesting at BC government liquor stores. Why do you not, and asking the political leaders, forcing them to answer, why do you think the lives of Palestinians don't matter? Then it's okay to kill and starve thousands and thousands of kids and people in Palestine. And so I think we need, like was said by the famous anti-racism, racism leader John Lewis in the US, we need to make trouble, good trouble. Trouble is coming from love, but way more courageous. And I don't see much of that at all. And I think we have a real challenge to create courage and not go along as we do so much in our society today.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question. I get this. I've been asked to speak to a nurses group and to speak about this, and that is, in the question of employment, they often say we have to have institutional neutrality, right? We can't discuss politics with our patients. We can't, as healthcare workers, we can't talk about politics or take sides. So how do you argue against that? How can we push back against this idea, so-called professionalism, which really, as we know, it's okay to say that the Ukraine is no good, but it's not okay to say that what Israel's doing is no good. It's okay to say what Russia's doing is no good. So and the argument is we're professionals, we're healthcare professionals. We don't take positions like that. How do you deal with that?
I would say that the concept of neutrality is totally appropriate when it comes to treating patients, so that you would not treat a Palestinian patient differently than you would a German patient or an Indonesian patient. You would treat them on the basis of the acuity of the condition. There's a branch of that what happens if you get an Israeli soldier who just shot an Israeli child, and there are moral issues there. But I think neutrality is a kind of false fig leaf to hide behind that people use as an excuse for not actually confronting moral issues. And I think if a society cannot take a stand, if a professional or just an average person cannot take a stand against genocide, which is considered the supreme crime, if people cannot take a position against that, then maybe they shouldn't be in healthcare. Maybe they should be doing something else. I think that healthcare, properly defined, means health in the broadest sense of human well-being and caring for human well-being on a global basis, and that should take priority over all of these other subsidiary jurisdictions and institutions that have been forged in times of war and self-interest that have managed to disguise their venality under lofty language. So we need to get beyond that.
Thank you. This is a question in response to something Amira said, which is, as a Jew, I've been arguing that Jewish people speaking out loudly gives other people cover for doing so, but it was pointed out that suggests that Jewish voices are often considered more important than other voices, and that's a dangerous message. Could you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so thank you very much for that question. And that's something that I grapple with quite a bit as well, in that I think anti-Zionist voices are essential in this, particularly to what I alluded to earlier when it comes to within Jewish circles and sort of, really taking the lead on trying to battle people's perception of what anti-Semitism is. But having said that, I do feel and worry that Palestinian voices are being drowned out by anti-Zionist voices, and that they are not platformed as much as Jewish ones, even if the Jewish voices are anti-Zionist voices that have a lot of important, like just a very, very essential, important voice. So I do think it is a complicated balance, and that there does need to be more effort put into highlighting Palestinian stories and Palestinian voices, even within anti-Zionist circles.
Okay, thank you. And then, sorry, I lost track here. Okay, so I'll do this as the last question, and then we'll go to any summaries you want to make. Okay, because we're getting to the 20 minutes till we end. So this question is, when considering the long-standing oppression, racism, and dehumanization of Palestinians perpetuated by an incredibly strong propaganda machine in the context of a severe, ever-increasing power imbalance. Okay, that doesn't look like, I don't understand I thought that was a question, but it's not. So yeah, what makes, I guess the question, I asked this before, but obviously it didn't get clearly responded to. What makes Palestine, Gaza so different? Like a lot of other issues, like you're saying Ukraine or, even Syria or in Africa, we don't talk about it as much, that's for sure. So one thing is we talk, even before October 7th, we talk about Palestine, Israel a lot more than we talk about terrible things happening in Africa or even in Asia. And what is it about Palestine, Israel that makes it so important to so many people? Not just, so important to the powers that be, but also important to our hearts, because I think it's on all sides about the most emotional issue that I know of. What do you think that is?
I think part of it has to do with religious history. There are approximately 30 million Christian Zionists in the United States who are actively organized and vote to fund the war. They have deep beliefs that are shared by many other Christians in a more general sense, just about the end times, the return of the Messiah. And this sort of conflicts with Jewish teachings around reconstruction of the Third Temple, which would involve destroying the Al-Aqsa Mosque and et cetera. So they're deep religious traditional arguments that are behind this that make it an international matter that I think pushes people into mythological thinking, and that is not necessarily the best thing to do. Netanyahu himself quoted the Old Testament teaching about the Amalekites, who are actually probably linguistic cousins. The Palestinians and modern day Jews are much closer ethnically than practically anybody else in the area. So religion plays a deep-seated it's a deep-seated power that's divisive if it's used the wrong way.
And I would say
Amy?
it's not just the number of people who hold those views, it's the power of those people. The pro-Israel voice comprises lots of powerful people who are big donors, who control political action committees, who control politicians, who control resources. And that sort of power is not to be denied. And they worm their way into our professional associations as well. And I noticed some chatter in the Q&A about whether it's worth pursuing these issues in our professional associations. Shouldn't we just all quit and go start our own organizations? And I would argue against that. First of all, these are old organizations and they have a lot of resources and they're very mainstream, and it's a good place for us to practice our skills of persuasion and moving people. And I would say, you know, we learned from apartheid in South Africa that what these organizations do and say and how they act politically can matter to the outcome of these political situations around the world. And our duty is to persuade our colleagues with good rhetorical devices, good processes, and taking stands on associated issues so that we can move our colleagues to care about these issues.
Okay, great. Oh, Amira,
Just
and then I'm going to move
quick
to.
thing.
Okay.
Sure. I agree with everything that was said. And I think on top of that, it's the time that we're in today, where there is a lot of more conversation around health inequities and decolonization. And everyone, I think, is a lot more aware of the colonial practices of the United States and Canada and all of the other settler colonies in terms of the atrocities that took place today than they were even 10 years ago, I would argue. So I think it's those kind of narratives and the kind of push within public health to move towards activism and advocacy that is just sort of that right time. I think Amy was the one who was talking about the right time. I think it's all of those things combined.
Okay, great. So the last question, which I'll just ask everybody to address, is you're all saying we should build coalitions, we should organize in our own, in our own areas, but I think people want some ideas about how to do that. And I think Amy all of you have provided some, but if you could include a little bit about that in your summary. I have to say, you really kept people's attention. I do these things a fair bit, and it's unusual to have this many people left after 2 hours. So congratulations, all of you, for making such compelling presentations and answers to the question. So I'll take in reverse order. So we'll start with Fred. It has to be like just 2-3 minute summary.
Yeah, sure. Well, what I would say is that we need to look at the emerging BRICS movement as a possible counterforce to the Western history of exploitive colonization.
Want to explain BRICS just in case anybody doesn't?
BRICS, it's the international alliances between Brazil, Russia, India, China, and now I think over 40 other countries are in line to become members. They will constitute the greater part of the global GNP within a few years. They're very economically significant. A lot of them are from the global south that have been abused during colonial times. So this is the kind of, and the countries that are backing Israel are precisely colonial countries themselves. So they don't, I think Palestine ends up being a kind of test point for what happens. Are there going to be reparations for Palestinians? The right of return, et cetera. Do Native Americans have the right of return? Colonized peoples all over the world are, I think, looking at this as a test case for how to get some kind of equity or revenge for the historical record. So I would suggest that we try to form a working group with BRICS, within the BRICS coalitions. Brazil has already created a think tank that and a BRICS academic forum that I think could be built on as a way of exploring both economic and institutional strategic alternatives to relying on the World Bank and the failed Bretton Woods structures.
Thank you. Nick.
Yeah, I think we need to appeal. I'm going to talk about it from the medical aspects, the healthcare professions. We need to appeal to the core values of medical care, which I outlined briefly in my talk earlier. It is utterly unconscionable that medical institutions, doctors, other healthcare workers can stay silent when they hear about the atrocities. The problem is making people aware of what's going on, and I think that is a hugely important thing for all of us to promote and share, so that people do understand what is going on. I think the tide is turning in the medical institutions. I think the platforms are beginning to be given to people to share what is going on, both nationally and internationally as well. There's a lot of linking up between different medical institutions, and as a result of the hard work and perseverance of some individuals. But I think they are beginning to realize that they can no longer remain silent, and that is as a direct result of the pressure being put on them, and particularly the evidence that's being shown upon them. So I think we just need to carry on with that pressure and do it together. There have been too many people and too many institutions who have been targeted with false accusations of anti-Semitism, and they're much more powerful. Everyone is much more powerful doing it together, doing it in collaborations.
Thank you very much. Amy.
Yeah, thank you, Nick, for that. I do think it's very important that we recognize what alliances we can make with each other and with subgroups of colleagues. This is not an individual endeavor that we're going to win at being heroic single people. We have to form these organizations. And so within American Public Health Association, we have 33 sections that are by sort of weird topics. And the international health section was, of course, well positioned to be able to form a Palestine Health Justice Working Group. And we created a little list server, and we proposed sessions for the annual conference. We worked together to find opportunities to insert ourselves. I noticed, I think it was Amira who talked about having a survey and a town hall in their organization. I'm going to borrow those ideas for APHA and see if those might help us sort of suss out majority opinion. If the governing council could pass that one sentence on ceasefire by 90%, we clearly have a base to operate from, and it's been stifled. And you know, we could persuade the powers that be to host a survey to suss out opinion. That might be useful, or a town hall. But let me just reiterate for people that the decision-making processes in our associations matter. And those fundamental democratic processes need attention, and they need attention regularly, not just when there's a crisis. And if you have allowed the processes in your associations to degrade and allow the powerful staff, I think staff have an outsized influence in our associations, and they're protecting what they view as their interests, and they're wrong about that. So we need to protect these democratic processes and do it on a regular maintenance basis, not just in the crisis moment.
Thank you. Amira, you sum it up for us, and then I'll ask Leslie to come in and sort of sum up the chat, because there are some good suggestions in the chat as well. Amira.
Sure. So I think I agree with everything that was already said, and just to really kind of emphasize that I think a lot of us always try to do the big thing, and really it's the collection of the little things that end up making the most impact in the long term. So just to put it out there that anything you can do, even if it seems minor, you know, you see a newspaper or whatever media channel with highly biased coverage of what's happening, sending an email out seems like nothing, but it's the collection of all of these things, be it in our institutions, in our job, and whatever it is. So I just encourage you all to just keep doing what you're doing, and yeah, hopefully free Palestine.
Free Palestine. Okay, great. I'll just sum up by saying that Leslie says that he will send out to everybody who's registered at the webinar a list of the practical suggestions. And I just want to say that I'm very moved and inspired by all of you. This is not my world that you live in. I mean, it is all of our worlds, but I mean, it gives me a lot of hope that there's people like you leading in medical spheres and scientific spheres. I know my friend Donna Mergler, who asked me to do this, I know the great work she does, and it's great to see all of you. And I thank you so much for wonderful, really wonderful presentation. Great. And hopefully, you know, a lot will come out of this. And one of the things is apparently the time is no good for the Australia and Asian countries. So this will be repeated for them. And thank you everybody who came and the great questions. And yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you all the people who
Wonderful.
organized.